If you are like me, already going into week 5, struggling with bye weeks, maybe you have a Justin Herbert, a Deshaun Watson, an Amari Cooper, maybe you have a Kenneth Walker, a Keenan Allen, a DK Metcalf, or even a Tyler Lockett, and you are struggling with depth position and you need to fill that wide receiver running back position, I'm bringing you some 8 high upside players that you should be starting going into week 5 of the fantasy football season. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get straight into it with my first player. Let's start off at my home, of course, the New York Football Giants, and that is Wan'Dale Robinson. Look, this team has been atrocious. I'd be completely honest with you. It's bad. The offensive line is terrible. Daniel Jones has no time. But what we do know is that Wan'Dale Robinson has been seeing an uptick in productions. He's coming back off that ACL tear that he suffered last year. He did miss the first 2 weeks, but he's getting ramped up. As you can see in week 3, only 22% of the snaps, catching 4 out of 5 targets. Then this past week, catching 5 out of 6 targets for 64 snaps, and I think that's going to increase as we go into week 5 of the fantasy football season. Once again, this offense is terrible. The offensive line is bad, but what we do know that this team has talent on the roster, and they're going to be down, and they're going to have to throw the ball. Okay, so look, I think he can pick off where he left off. Maybe not. It may not be this week, but as the season progresses, we can see that. You know what, Wan'Dale Robinson, the game that he tore his ACL against the Detroit Lions, he caught 9 out of 13 targets at over 19 fantasy points that game. There is some upside there, especially if you're struggling at the wide receiver position and you need a flex. Maybe Wan'Dale's on your waiver wires. Maybe you already picked him up and saying, hey, once again, you had a DK Metcalf and Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore, Keenan Allen, whoever the case may be, and you needed the wide receiver. Wan'Dale Robinson does have that high upside type of play. Now, once again, it's not sexy. This past week, he scored just under 10 fantasy points, but I think this is where he can breach those double-digit points coming into week 5. So starting with confidence if you do need, once again, a desperational play. Going into my second player coming into this list, and this is the only time I believe in his career, in his fantasy football career, that anyone is telling you to start him in a streamer type of position or saying like, hey, there's some upside for this player, and that is Zach Wilson. If you are struggling at the quarterback position, once again, a Baker Mayfield is out, a Justin Herbert, Deshaun Watson, the list goes on, right? Zach Wilson, if you need a streaming option, there is some upside here. Look, if Zach Wilson can produce exactly what we saw in the second half of the game last week against the Kansas City Chiefs, hey, there could be some opportunity. Now, don't expect a 30-plus point game from Zach Wilson. Really expect more of a 15 to 20-plus point game. And if you get those 20-plus points, that is a phenomenal week of picking up a streamer and starting him if you are in a one quarterback or a super flex type of league. Now, he is playing the Denver Broncos, who have been great against opposing quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. Hear this out. The Broncos give the 3rd most points to the quarterback position. We saw what Justin Fields did the week before. Even though they lost that game, Justin Fields was still a top fantasy finishing quarterback that week. You look at the running back position as well. If you to even throw out more names, if you have a Breece Hall, I've kind of been saying a smash start coming into this week, giving the 2nd most points to the running back position, the Denver Broncos, the 6th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. It seems like everyone on this team really feels like a confident must start. Zach Wilson, Breece Hall, and Garrett Wilson coming into week 5 against the Denver Broncos. So look, if you need a streaming quarterback, maybe you're saying Daniel Jones, he's not doing too well right now. The offensive line is terrible. Maybe Zach Wilson is a better streaming start for you, right? There's so many different opportunities. Maybe there's so many different scenarios that you are struggling with. Zach Wilson, I think you should pick him up coming into week 5. Going into my 3rd player at the tight end position, I can't believe I'm here telling you this, but Jonnu Smith is more valuable than Kyle Pitts right now. I mean, look, it's been a disappointing start to the season for Kyle Pitts, and if you haven't seen that video surfacing all over Twitter right now about Kyle Pitts and his route running, look, there's 2 parts to it. He looks bad, and it also looks like he's still not maybe 100%. So give him a little bit of grace. I've seen a lot of timelines saying he should be 100% by week 10, which is pretty surprising to me. But anyways, if you are a Kyle Pitts owner, I'm sorry. And if you are a Kyle Pitts owner and Jonnu Smith is still on waiver wires and you need a higher upside play, I would rather go there as he's playing the Houston Texans this past week, but this week, excuse me. But I really want to show you the averages through 4 weeks with Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts and why, even though in the tight end position, those margins may not be massive, they are pretty significant when you think of the fantasy finishes week in and week out. So you can see, and I did this in an average right through 4 weeks. Jonnu Smith versus Kyle Pitts. You can see the snap percentage. Kyle Pitts is definitely getting more snaps on the field. He's getting less receptions than Jonnu Smith. He's getting more targets than Jonnu Smith, less yards than Jonnu Smith, but Jonnu Smith is averaging more fantasy points. And once again, it's not a huge margin, just over 1 fantasy points per game right now Jonnu Smith is averaging. But look at the fantasy finish, which I think is pretty significant, because we all know that tight end position is so volatile, it's going up and down. It's so inconsistent to where we would rather have that player is maybe averaging more fantasy points, even if it's 1 point per game, right? Half a point per game. That's pretty significant. That's regardless of the talent. I think you have to throw the talent away right now, specifically with Kyle Pitts, because as much as we have been holding on to him saying, we believe in Kyle Pitts, we believe in him, we believe in the talent. He was the top, 10 draft, since the top 10 fantasy pick in the real NFL draft since Tony Gonzalez, the best tight end since Tony Gonzalez. It's not showing right now, which is unfortunate. And once again, maybe it's because he's still unhealthy, whatever the case may be, or maybe it's even the quarterback play. But look at the fantasy finishes. Tight end 12 for Jonnu Smith versus tight end 29 for Kyle Pitts. This is crazy to see that Jonnu Smith at this very moment is more valuable than Kyle Pitts. And if you need a good streaming tight end that maybe has higher upside, I think that is pretty significant here. The past 3 games, Jonnu Smith, 8 fantasy points in week 2. Week 3, over 8 fantasy points in week 3. Week 4, 15 fantasy points. That is absolutely absurd. Kyle Pitts hasn't broke more than 9 fantasy points a game this year. That is crazy. So if you do need a tight end position, please go get Jonnu Smith and start him with some confidence going into week 5. All right, going into my next player here for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think another offense that a lot of people are not liking at the moment, which is completely understandable. But if you are struggling with injuries, if you are struggling with bye weeks, Tyler Boyd, I think it's somebody that you can pick up and stream, or maybe you already have him and you can flex him coming into week 5. Now, what's crazy about this, when I was doing my research, you look at these games and you say, okay, what are the games that T. Higgins has missed? Because in reality, I'm telling you to start Tyler Boyd, because we always say this, when T. Higgins goes down and or Jamar Chase is going to miss some time, we're saying Tyler Boyd is a phenomenal fill-in opportunity because he has a chemistry with Joe Burrow. We've seen him produce fantasy relevant numbers in the past with confidence, and you should be starting him with confidence if you do have him. But what's crazy is that I looked specifically to the games that he filled in for T. Higgins. Oddly enough, there are only 2 games. And I think the numbers are a little bit skewed, because when I went to go look back at the numbers in the past 3 years, you see T. Higgins has actually started those games, maybe had, 2 to 3 to 5 snaps, and then was out of the game or was ruled out. So there's only 2 games where he was officially ruled out before the game. And these are the numbers that you can see on your screen now, where when Tyler Boyd is in without T. Higgins, he is averaging over 17 fantasy points per game, over 6 receptions per game, and you can see over 8 targets per game. So I think that is pretty significant when you think of Tyler Boyd stepping in for T. Higgins. Maybe T. Higgins, look, we saw the reports, he practiced in limited fashion. Is he still going to be 100% with that rib? And I think if he does play, he might be a decoy. So if you wake up in the morning and you see T. Higgins starting and you're questioning yourself, should I start T. Higgins? You probably do have to start T. Higgins, unfortunately. But if you are somebody that has Tyler Boyd that doesn't have T. Higgins and says T. Higgins, you see the report, T. Higgins is still playing, look into that report a little bit more, because he may be limited, and then Tyler Boyd could be that guy taking all those opportunities away from T, as maybe T is being more of a decoy coming in to week 5. So start Tyler Boyd with some confidence coming in, some good high upside that you want going into week 5, right? My next player here, Gus the Bus. It may not sound exciting, but this is a perfect opportunity for him to really bounce back coming into week 5. Look, this past week didn't have the best week. He did play the Cleveland Browns, who have the best run defense right now in the NFL. They give the least amount of fantasy points to the running back position, and we saw that with Gus. He had 15 carries for 48 yards, but what's crazy is that he was knocked out with concussion in that game. But now he is going and he's playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, who give the 6th most fantasy points to the running back position, coming back healthy off the concussion. And I do believe they're going to be running the ball because obviously we all know this is a divisional game. Steelers versus Ravens, anything can happen here. We've seen the run game on the ground, and we've seen the big passing games. But what we do know is that Gus the Bus can easily produce a good 10 to 12 fantasy points if you are struggling at the running back position going into week 5. So start Gus with some confidence here. All right, going into my next players, 2 players in 1. So keep this in mind. I'm going to break it down a little bit differently, okay? But this is Josh Reynolds and Jameson Williams. If you are struggling, once again, at the wide receiver position, it looks like right now Amon-Ra St. Brown is doubtful going into week 5. And if you are somebody saying, I need some high upside play, what does that look like? So let's start off with Josh Reynolds, okay? Josh Reynolds, I believe, is the safer floor going into week 5 versus the Carolina Panthers, who technically are good against the wide receiver, but are struggling with a lot of injuries in secondary. And I think that is going to change because a lot of people are running against them, which this is why we said Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery are smash starts coming into week 5. But Jahmyr Gibbs popping up in the injury report with that hamstring injury in practice, which means we could see this offense maybe forcing to throw the ball just a little bit more than expected because they don't want to run David Montgomery into the ground as much if Jahmyr Gibbs is going to miss some time. So going back to Josh Reynolds, he is a safer floor versus the Carolina Panthers. We've seen what he's done in the past. He has those boom and bust games, right? Look, week 1, over 12 fantasy points. Week 2, over 22 fantasy points, scoring 2 touchdowns, catching 5 out of 6 targets that game. Then we go to week 3 against the Atlanta Falcons, where he dropped a goose. And everyone picked him up. They probably spent a lot of fab, and they said, why the hell did I pick up Josh Reynolds? I understand. Then in week 4 against the Green Bay Packers, catches 3 out of 6 targets, but we saw how dominant David Montgomery was on the ground. This may be a little bit different. So depending on what type of play you need, if you need a safer floor, Josh Reynolds. But if you need a high upside, coming off suspension, Jameson Williams, I think, has a higher ceiling. Obviously, coming off suspension, we haven't seen the true chemistry with Jared Goff and Jameson Williams. But if Amon-Ra is out, we might have to see that sooner rather than later. Now, the reason why he's a higher ceiling is because he's the field stretcher. He is somebody that can easily catch a 60 bomb pass and score it for a touchdown, and that is easily 14 fantasy points for you right there. So that's why he is the higher ceiling, but at the same time he has a very risky floor to where he may not even catch a pass, or maybe he catches 2 to 3 for, I don't know, a 10 yards, 15 yards or so, and you're disappointed. So before you come into this week, once Amon-Ra is ruled out, ask yourself, do you need a high upside play, or do you need a safe floor type of ceiling type of play? That's why I think Josh Reynolds and J-Mo could be some good options coming in for you. All right, going into my next plays, my 2 last plays, once again, another package going to the Kansas City Chiefs, Richie Rich and Sky Moore, Rashee Rice and Sky Moore here. Look, a lot of people I've been seeing a lot of people bring Rashee Rice, which I think is great. I'm not disagreeing that Rashee Rice could be a good option for you to start, but I think they're leaving out Sky Moore. And I know it may not be exciting here, and I did the same thing by breaking down their averages going into the last 4 weeks, and you can see it here, right? It's not exciting, but what I want and what I like about Sky Moore is his snap percentages. He is on the field more times than not, Rashee Rice, which I would rather have if they are in a pickle, which means if they are struggling at the in the passing game or in the running game or whatever the case may be, or maybe the other team is in a shootout with the Minnesota Vikings, which I think Kirk Cousins could go in a shootout with the Kansas City Chiefs, Sky Moore has more opportunity on the field, okay? Once again, I did the 4 averages. You can kind of see it on your screen. You probably see it on your screen here, snap count. Sky Moore has more with over 62% versus Rashee Rice 36. But after that, everything else is in favor of Rashee Rice. You can see the reception is more, the targets are more, the yardage are more, the fantasy points are more, and the wide receiver finish is significantly better than Sky Moore. So that's why I think when you think about, I can understand why they like Rice, because we're seeing he has been the more efficient player when he's on the field. But what I like about Sky Moore is that he has been on the field and had the most opportunities, but less numbers to show, because we saw in week 1 where he dropped that goose egg and everyone was like, what the hell's going on? And then against the Jets, we really just saw Isaiah Pacheco take over that game on the ground, which I think that's why it was less of throwing opportunity with Rashee Rice. And you can even say that when it comes down to everyone else on that team outside of Travis Kelce, of course. But look, both these guys technically aren't sexy, but if you are struggling with wide receiver depth and you need a good flex option on a high-powered offense, Rashee Rice and Sky Moore could be the guys coming in and helping your team, hopefully getting you that W going into week 5. Guys, hopefully comment down below. Once again, 8 high upside players that you can come in and start. I'm going to bring you a bonus right off the fly here, because I'm not necessarily sure. As I'm recording this video, the reports are saying Javonte Williams is questionable with a full participation of practice this past Friday. If he doesn't play somehow, Jaleel McLaughlin, I think, could be a phenomenal start coming into this week, as they are playing the New York Jets, who are right now bad against the run defense. And when we saw from Jaleel, I think he has a higher upside than a Samaje P. Ryan. I think we can see him get more workload on the ground and maybe even in the air. So that is a bonus player for you on the fly. That is somebody that I really wanted to bring, but if Javonte Williams does play, it kind of makes him irrelevant. So I made him a bonus player for you guys. Guys, once again, comment down below. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns. We're going to be live 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight for you guys to answer all of your fantasy start sit questions. So come in, drop your comments down below, and as always, it's all love.
Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.